In previous videos, we built some traditional hardwood steps for the back door of our house, then added posts from reclaimed hardwood. In this video, we'll be adding handrails to these posts that we want to be in keeping with the original 130-year-old house. We need handrails between these posts for the steps themselves, and between the top post and the wall of the house for the landing. We'll start with the most difficult handrail, which is the one for the stairs. The length and cut angle we can get from the drawing we did in a previous video. Because of the angles, this is a difficult thing to measure accurately on the posts themselves. And we've built everything according to this drawing, so it will be dead accurate. Yeah. We've already marked out our handrail and made the first cut. And then we're going to do our other cut. With that lined up with that very corner. Ooh, be careful with that. We'll see how this fits. It's looking good. To attach the bottom part of the handrail to the post, we'll use a batten screw from underneath. Although we'll need to pre-drill because that post is really hard wood. Because we know that timber inside that post is pretty hard stuff. Yep, it looks like I didn't pre-drill that deep enough, so I'll need to go in a bit deeper. And we come off the top, just to make things difficult. The top of the handrail is just sitting against the post at this point, which is why it came loose. Right, now that's looking good. Now for the top. Now for the top one, we need to go in on an angle from there. We can't do it from the bottom, which means we will see the hole. But we'll just have to cut it down so we don't see the head, and then put some filler over the top. I know that's not traditional, but it will work. When doing this, we had to pre-drill for the batten screw first into that really hard wood, and then use a larger bit at the beginning of the hole so the end of the screw would be below the surface and wouldn't be seen later on when that hole was filled in. Right, that feels pretty firm. We need a handrail going from this post to the wall of the house. Although we can't have the handrail just screwed to the chamfer boards, we need to put in another post screwed to the wall of the house that the handrail can be screwed to. Right, I found this piece of 100 by 50 hardwood under the house. It's a bit rough, but if you just cut it to length, you can make like a nice half post to go against that wall. Now it needs to be 970 millimeters, and then we can dress it up.
Right, easiest way to clean this up is use a plane.
We can plane this because it has no old paint on it or nails in it. The edges also aren't square, and the plane squares them off. There was nails in this timber at some point, but they've since been removed. This post will be painted, so any nail holes remaining can be filled.
Still a little bit of grain sort of exposed, whatever, but I don't want it to look dead clean. I like it to look a bit rustic because it's an old house. And we can hit it with a belt.
Once this is all sanded up, we'll then see what it looks like against the wall.
You can see some plane marks in there, but I don't mind that. Once again, it's all to look rustic. I think they will look fine like that.
Our half post needs to line up with the full post, so we mark it out using a level to get it plumb. We'll be using batten screws to attach the half post to the wall, so we mark holes out for these 100mm from each end and centered. Once again, we drill a larger hole in the top so the head of the screw is under the surface. We then screw the post directly to the chamfer boards that are 22mm soft pine. There's not a lot of load on this handrail, so this will hold fine.
Now I need to cut a bit more handrail.
We're measuring this handrail on the posts because the drawing didn't allow for that half post and we need it fitting nice and tightly. It needs to be tight enough so it will sit in place on its own and its exact position can be adjusted, ready for screwing on. Once again, we're using batten screws to attach the handrail to the posts. These will fit in from underneath, so won't be seen, saving us from having to check them out and then fill up holes later on.
Right, we have a whole lot of this reclaimed balustrading, and which we'd like to use on these. The ends are a bit rotten because it's been sitting on the ground, but the rot sort of stops, or for these two wider ones, stops kind of there. So we're going to put a bottom rail on here.
The height of the bottom rail will be determined by the length of the slats once the rotten bits are cut off. The ends of each slat must be cut at an angle to fit into the top and bottom rails. We mark the rotten ends of the two wider slats first because these are more rotten than any of the others. We then compare the two and adjust measurements where necessary to make sure they're the same length, which is determined by the shortest of the two. We then mark the tops as well.
Right, I've cut a piece of bottom rail.
We then check how parallel the bottom rail is with the stringer of the stairs, as this is more obvious than how parallel it is with the top rail. We then find and mark the horizontal position of the bottom rail relative to the top rail so that the balustrading will be plumb. We then screw the bottom rail to the posts with batten screws like we did with the top rail at a height determined by the measurements we made on those slats earlier. Although because the bottom rail doesn't have a slot in it like the top rail, the head of the batten screw was too obvious, so we had to remove it, check it in and replace it so it's under the surface. We then screw on the top of the bottom rail, once again checked in so the head of the screw won't be seen. The screw doesn't seem to have pulled up tight enough.
Ooh, broke the end of it. Damn.
The thickness of timber for the bottom rail is thinner here because of the angle, so more of the batten screw had to go into the very hard wood, and it ended up snapping off inside the hardwood, so we've had to remove it, and now we'll be putting in a new shorter batten screw, pre-drilling it from a different angle so it will miss the piece that's left inside.
Right. Now we're going to run a rail across there that will look in the same line as the other rail. I seem to build up a lot of crap right in the way of where I'm working. The measurement of this is about there.
We then cut a length of bottom rail and once again make this a tight fit so it's easier to work with. We then need to decide what height it will be. Too low and it doesn't really line up with that other rail, but we don't want it too high either. It needs to look parallel with the landing, but also be parallel with the top rail so that all our slats can be cut to the same length. We also need to consider the slats. They need to fit in there, not be too short. And once again we fit it with batten screws and check it in so the head's not visible, although this time we're on a bit of an angle because the landing's in the way. That brings us to the end of this video. In the next video, we'll be adding reclaimed slats to these rails to complete building the balustrading.